today I'm really pleased to be here with Lisa Long, who is right now VP of Innovation and Product Governance of Telenor. And Lisa, welcome to Lviv.
Thank you so much. It's my first time to the Ukraine, and it's been a really great introduction to come to this conference. So thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
We are happy when speakers are happy. So, yeah, Lisa, you're working at Telenor. When I'm thinking of Norway, I came to Norway like 3 years ago, and everyone told me, you need to meet somebody from Telenor. I said, what is Telenor? And they said, oh, you don't know about the Telenor, you don't know about the Norway. So how did you manage just to get there? And what was your career path, and which your personal features and traits were good for you to become at the place you are in right now?
So I'll answer the question first about how I got to Telenor, because that is a little bit of a strange question, or a strange journey from my perspective. I was working at Skype in London, and I went to the Norwegian Developers Conference, and so I was talking to some people there, and they told me that there was this really great application they were making called Appear In. And it was a video conferencing application, and I had to meet the people because we were going to have really interesting conversations, being a product manager who came from Skype to talk to the Appear In team. So I did actually end up meeting the Appear In team, had a chat with them, and I did find what they were doing incredibly fascinating. So much so that I left London and Skype and moved to Norway to work on the Appear In team as their product manager. So
it's dangerous to go to conferences, I see.
It's dangerous to go to conferences. All kinds of interesting opportunities present themselves. So yeah, when I started as part of Appear In is actually owned by Telenor. So I worked in the Appear In team for about 1.5 years, and then I moved into a VP of product management role. And then from there, this expanded into doing product governance for all the different products and all the business units for Telenor, and the innovation role, which is helping to run the innovation program that actually takes kind of seeding new and interesting ideas we have inside Telenor and bringing them into the actual product portfolio.
Oh, wow. So right now you're creating the whole innovation, the whole process of product innovations in Telenor, as I understand.
Yeah. So we have an innovation program that we run called Ignite. And Ignite lets 30 different teams from all the different business units. Anyone can actually pitch an idea. And the 30 finalists will come and pitch their ideas in person to a panel of judges that are both internal resources inside Telenor and some external startup people. And then the kind of somewhere between 10 and 15 people from that group will be brought forward into the Ignite program. And we spend 3 months teaching them all about user research and how to do problem statements and how to understand like how to prototype properly and design sprints, all this thinking, which being part of a telco, not many people know. And at the end of this, we then take the idea that actually works the best, that we think, okay, this is the most promise, and we work with that team for 1 year to further develop that idea.
So it's kind of internal incubator with an accelerator program where you teach them and then you incubate and then you take this project, finance it, and like put to the market.
Yep, and we move it forward.
Awesome, like developing innovations inside your company.
Yep.
But let's return back. It's very interesting about the Ignite, but it's even more interesting about you. So which traits, what was your path to product management? Because I know that it's a common thing when we are told, okay, you cannot be a product manager just from the street. You need to have some experience, some business experience, even an MBA. And without these things, you cannot be a good product manager. Is it right or no? Or
So my perspective is that I think it's best for product managers to start in kind of one of the 3 areas that Martin Erickson talks about. Is it business? Is it user research? Is it technology? Or one of those areas you need to be very conversant in. So I think you have to have 5-10 years experience in one particular area, and then you have to branch out to the next one. So I actually came through the technology side. So I started off as an engineer. So I worked in programming, building systems, and then I went and got my MBA. And then after that is when I really started coming into the product side of things, of actually building both sides of the business and the technology, and then working on the user side. So I think that's the thing that's most important. The thing that's even more important than having a particular grounding is always being willing to learn, because there is no expert in product management. The expert is the person who learns the fastest and learns the most. So you never get to the point where, yes, you have lots of experience, but there is always a new way to find a problem. There's always a new way to actually understand the users. And without actually having that constant renovation and that constant rethinking of how you learn, what's actually happening in the industry, what's happening in technology, getting all these pieces together and keeping them fresh all the time, that is what makes a good product manager.
What else makes a good product manager? Because as you said, we have like several spheres where a product manager can come from. I'm personally from business. I know that a lot of people are coming from tech field and they are super nerdy but super cool in some kind of things. And there are designers and experienced designers who want also to go to product managers. The same thing we will face in our company as well in the future. So, but there are some traits, as you said, like long time learning, as I understood. But what else a good product manager needs to have? Like not about coding on Java, but is it kind of common sense or critical thinking or some other stuff?
I think a good attitude for a product manager to have is to be very humble as well. So I know in the tech world, especially having been an engineer myself, there comes a point at which you're the expert and you're the one who knows everything and everybody else is stupid. You really have to get rid of that as a product manager. You always have to come to the table in a very humble way in which you say, you know what, there probably isn't something I actually understand about this entire thing. And there are probably smarter people than me in this room. And so how do I actually work with them to make sure that we have the best possible solution for what we think is the actual problem? So humbleness is definitely something that I think I've seen in the people who have that I look up to, and I think that they actually really do an amazing job of actually finding out and getting into the nugget of like what a problem is. I think another area that would actually be useful for a product manager to have is a very good dose of logic. And this is perhaps biased from my background.
No, I think it's not biased because you always communicate with developers, and if you have no logic in your actions, and they will say you, okay, no.
There is a certain amount, you just have to step back because many times, and I mentioned this in my speech, you fall in love with your product. You fall in love with this idea and the solution that you have. And at some point in time, your baby is actually going to be ugly. It's not going to be a good thing. And you need to be able to take a little bit of distance from what you've been building, step back and say, okay, does this really solve the problem? Can I actually really take a little more objective viewpoint on this rather than a subjective one of how much I've put into this project? And I think that's really difficult to, I mean, it's something I still work on to this day for the different systems I introduce, the different products I work with, is trying to overcome that bias of, but I've spent so much time on this, surely there's something here to salvage. And being able to step back and say, you know what, it's better for us to scorch earth, burn it all, start again.
Yeah, sunset of product or just pivot of the product, it's also a good decision, I mean, sometimes. But how to get to that point? I mean, what's your personal checklist on how not to be in love with your product? Because when we are spending a lot of time with our children, I mean, our child, which is called like X product right now, you're just thinking that this is the best product, everyone would love it, and yeah. So how to avoid this?
So part of this is that you have to have a really clear understanding of who your user is. So if you start building a product and you don't actually know who your user is, or worse, you say, I'm the user, then you should stop. That's your first checkpoint.
Are you talking about the persona, or it's like, whom do you consider here as a user? Just a small remark.
So the user in this case is who's the person that has this problem. So for example, if we talk about Zombies Run, which is the game from 6 to Start, the problem there is people hate running. It's a horrible thing. Running is an awful activity. Nobody should do it. But we understand people want to try it because they want to get fit and they have different reasons why they want to do it. But the problem that we saw was people hate running, but they want to try it. So how do we help them, even though they hate it, try it anyway? And so we went back and said, how do we solve this problem? What other stuff do people like? Well, people like stories. And we know that if we make a cliffhanger story, people will be mad enough about wanting to know what happens in the story that we can make them go running again. And so this was kind of the predication that we did for actually setting this the project up was, okay, if we understand that people hate running, they don't want to do it, but they like stories and they want to listen to stories, then we need to make a story where they have to run. And that way, the only way they can find out what happens is they have to go running again. So similarly, when you have your product, you need to think of, okay, what is the problem I'm solving? Who is the person that has this? And I like to get away from things like people saying, oh, well, it's 25-year-olds, hipsters in London. That's who we're building for.
That's it.
The demographics, I think, are a false behavior. What you need to look for are the behaviors. So people who hate running. There are people who use Zombies Run who are 80 years old and 8 years old. So when you actually have a problem, it's the behavior you're looking at, not a particular demographic. You may find afterwards that when you build this product, a certain group of people that have a particular set of demographics gravitate towards this, but then that's a problem for your marketing people, because what you need to focus on is who's the people who show this particular behavior, and does this product solve that behavior for them?
Yeah, I see. And what else do you have, like, for not to be biased by your product?
So another thing you need to do is make sure you're actually talking to those people on a regular basis, and that you're getting a fresh set of eyes on it all the time. So one problem that a lot of companies have is they get a particular set of users to be their user researcher, or to be the people that the user researchers study, but they don't change them out often enough. So they're not constantly looking for new people. So they may end up going down a rat hole of building for these particular 20 people that they're interviewing, but they're missing the bigger picture of what's actually needing to be solved by that particular product. So you need to make sure you have a constant pipeline of new people that are showing the same behavior, so that way you can interview them as well. And then once you actually have this information, you actually need to make sure everyone in your company, not just you as a product manager, but your engineers, your designers, I mean, your user researchers are doing this work, but even your managers may need to come out and see what the results are from the user research, or participate in the user research. And this may be they're handing out pens for a day, standing in a park. But the idea is they get to interact with the users in a way that makes it a lot more meaningful to them when they actually see why particular decisions have to be made in the product, because it turns out the users don't think that way, or the users don't realize that this is where that information should be held. The last thing I think that is actually really important is communication. So when it comes to saying like, oh, okay, I think this is a great idea, I think my solution is wonderful, I think it's great, the way you communicate to your users can actually determine or make or break you as to whether you're actually getting any value out of talking to those users. So if you tell them, hey, please look at my app, isn't my app great? You have tainted that user because now they don't want to make you feel bad about the fact that it's horrible. So making sure that you actually learn to communicate in a way that is more neutral, and it's, tell me about how you would use this. Tell me about a time when you had this problem. Learning to ask more open-ended questions so that people can understand, it's for the user to tell you what the problem is. It's not for you to define the user and say, hey, I know you have a problem with your watch. I know you don't like your watch. I'm totally going to fix your watch for you. And maybe that's not really a thing for them, because their watch is about fashion. It's not about telling time.
Very interesting points concerning this communication. And I would love to ask you my next question concerning the communication for innovations. Right now, I will expand on this. So, as we know, Steve Jobs created innovative products. I mean, iPhone and everything from touchpad to all this, like finger reading technologies. But people at that time didn't understand this type of innovation. I mean, those were only early adopters. And here is my question: how to listen to people to understand whether they will like this innovation or no, or just to test this and see whether this product had the product market fit or no?
So it takes a long time to get from the point where you actually have a customer need to a commercial product. If you look at Clayton Christensen or Nathan Furr or any of a number of people who have studied innovation in the wild, to go from a customer need using existing technology to solve it for a commercializable problem is 5 to 7 years. So this is not something where, oh, I built this and 2 months later I have 1 million users. That's not actually reality. And many times the stories that you see in TechCrunch or TechEU talk about companies that miraculously came onto the scene after 6 months and they have huge growth. Many times those companies will have actually had another company name, reincorporated themselves. So yes, they're 6 months old, but the team has been working together for 8 years. For Rovio, it took 7 years and 52 games before they hit Angry Birds. So innovation is not something that happens overnight. It happens very slowly with a few people who are actually testing this. And as far as your question of how do you figure out what people will do, the company that actually did the touch for Apple was called, I believe, Finger Clicks or Fingertips, something like that. So Apple bought that company, and it was going bankrupt. So they bought it in a fire sale. And when they actually started getting that company in to actually look at the technology, they realized that there were a lot of kind of elements that they needed to redo in terms of thinking about humans and how the research they had done on how humans would actually use different interfaces. So even though they had bought the company that had the technology to be able to make these touchscreens, the way that the touchscreens worked still needed a lot of care and feeding from the user research perspective to see how users would really use it. And the way you actually find, so in the early days, like you say, there are these early adopters who look at this problem and are willing to go through a lot more pain to get something fixed. This is partly what you need to do as a company to make sure that the problem that you're finding is something that's actually endemic in a group of people. Because if you find a problem that's only for 5 people, unless those people are billionaires,
It's not a market.
it's not a market. Yeah. It's a hobby. Maybe you can fix it for those people and they'll buy you dinner. But you're not building a company at that point. So one of the things that's most important is if you're going to pick to actually do some sort of new innovation, make sure that the problem you are seeing is something that's actually you see indications that this is prevalent in a wider population. The population may not know it has this problem. The population may think it's perfectly reasonable to, write a letter by hand, put it in an envelope, and then take a week to get somewhere because they don't know that there's a better way. But in order for you to actually find that kind of thing, you have to look at proxies. So how are people actually solving these problems? And then if those people actually solve the problem this way, what's the likelihood they would switch to another way to do it? So your early adopters tend to be people who actually have the problem so badly because they run into it on a much more frequent basis, or it costs them more money, or it costs them more time. So you can see if they're willing to change their behavior. And if they're willing to change their behavior because they're very early adopters, then gradually, as you make it easier for them to solve that problem, you can then get more and more of the people who say, well, this isn't as much pain or as much problem for me, but now you've actually made it enough easier for me to do it that way. And that's how you actually grow your group over time.
I see. So you need to iterate, to search for your market and to test all the time these innovative technologies.
Yeah. So testing, more testing, user testing,
learning,
finding out what's happening with your competition. So now you see why learning is so important for product managers.
Yeah, of course. I understood that product managers, those are people who are long lifetime learners. And that's all. I mean, every time a new technology evolve or a new user just evolve or a new problem evolves, so you need to react to those things. Yeah, just really cool. And kind of last question here is about the people in your team and how do you spend your day? Because not your day to day because you're working kind of innovative things. I think that you will be more about meetings, so I can just suggest. But for example, in Skype or in Telenor as a product manager, so how was your day and which people surrounded you? Where did you have a UX researcher or did you have a designer, etc.? So, or you just perform those functions on your own?
So I'll give a little more abstract answer. So inside Telenor, we have 5 stages for products. And so if you're an early stage product or a late stage product, you have very different things you would do on a given day. So in the early stages, in what we call stars or bottle rockets, you're working more with user researchers and building very simplistic prototypes with maybe a single designer to actually test with your with your results. So their day is mostly spent designing experiments and hypotheses to test, and then going out and testing it. If you're a product manager who's actually in the later stages of the product, so you're at the scaling point, you're trying to actually make something work for hundreds of thousands or potentially millions of people, a lot more of what you're looking at is kind of a combination of effects of how is our technology working? Is that actually something we can scale? So they spend maybe a third of their time looking at the technology questions of how are we going to actually solve this particular scaling question? A third of their time maybe on compliance or legal. So how do we understand what are the challenges from a business perspective or a business framework to work on? And then a third of it is actually working on, inside the product, what are the kinds of things that we actually need to do? And that's looking at user research, market research, competition, and understanding what those things are doing so that they can actually figure out what the better way is to solve the problem for their users.
Are those different people, like for different 5 stages, or this can be one person who can go through all the stages?
So typically you would have a team that actually starts together and then goes through the stages. But quite frankly, the product managers you'll find kind of self-segregate. There are those who actually like to work much earlier stages, so they want to do a lot more of the experimentation, user research, and so on. And there are others who really like, tweaking and refining, making that 2% more convert. As opposed to making 300% more conversion. So we always start the teams together for them to actually take an idea through. But as the actual product matures and gets more of a fit and understands more people and has more people using it, we do actually need to change the team typically as it actually goes through because there are different sets of skill sets you want, and people are just interested in doing different things. But having said that, for 2 of the teams, the product managers have actually gone all the way through all the different stages for their products because they were interested in seeing the whole pipeline.
Yeah, it's kind of ruined the first part of this talk, ruined my imagination about the product manager because I was always thinking that there should be one product manager from the very beginning till the very end. And right now I see that it could be in the other way. And very last question, because I remember that there is something interesting about your work, that you are working both with Norwegian market and with Bangladesh. Yes, as I understood.
Bangladesh, Pakistan,
Yeah.
Myanmar, Thailand, Malaysia.
Yeah. And you're working more with empathy, understanding user problems, so and user needs. How they differ? I mean, in those regions, are they differ at all?
I guess you get to the point of basic human needs. Everybody needs food, everybody needs shelter, everybody needs to feel security, and these societies are very different in how they would actually make you feel you have social approbation. They'll make you feel like, so it's different. In Norway, if you're a female who's unmarried at the age of 30, who cares? But if you're a female and you're unmarried in Bangladesh at age 30, there's a lot of concern and pressure from the families about what is happening. So there's very different kind of cultural memes that come to each one of these cultures. And so it takes time to actually understand, okay, what are the rules in each one of these cultures? What are the things people find important? Because everyone finds it important to be in good social standing, but to be in good social standing is very different in Norway than it is in Bangladesh.
Totally different, I suppose so.
Yeah, so it's interesting because we need to learn these things. And my team is, we have a few Bangladeshis, some Danish, Singaporean, Norwegian, Canadian and American. So we have all kinds of nationalities working together. And part of this is actually us to understand, how do we actually work together? How do we find that common ground so that we can actually make a really good team where we have the psychological safety that they've talked about a lot here, I'm sure, so that we can tell each other, hey, this isn't working the way I expect, or, I wasn't expecting the communication to work that way.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much, Lisa, for this part of talk. And I would like you to give some part of your personal wisdom or some advice to our product managers who will be listening this video on YouTube or somewhere else in 2 years, 5 years or so.
Okay, the first port of call I can send you to is Mind the Product. There are an excellent set of videos there. Just watch everything from every single past conference. There's a lot of really good content
Amazing.
there. The next thing I would tell you to do is go to Simon Cross. He's from Facebook. He has a reading list. Go through Simon Cross's product manager reading list. This will have a fantastic set of books that you should actually read. I would also recommend reading the books by Laura Klein and by Erica Hall. Erica Hall's book is called Just Enough Research. So this will be the good educational resources that can start you on your way to understand the kinds of things that will actually help you get that learning aptitude, get that learning curiosity, intent, wanting to actually know how to solve problems. And it just gives you a lot of examples. Because the one thing you should know as a product manager, you're going to screw up a lot of stuff. You're going to cost companies millions of dollars over your career. So just accept that that's going to happen and try to stand up after that, dust yourself off and say, what did I learn? Because if you didn't learn something from, a major mistake or disaster, then it wasn't worth it. And that's the most horrifying feeling, is that when you don't have something you can learn from something you've messed up.
Yeah. Thank you, Lisa, so much for this inspiring talk. And please welcome to next conferences here.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.